if I asked you what the greatest genjutsu in all of Naruto was, what would you say? The vast majority of you would probably say something like Koto Amatsukami, Shisui's genjutsu. I mean, after all, it is constantly referred to as the greatest genjutsu in Naruto. But those of you who have been probably listening to me for too long would probably say Tsukiyomi, Itachi's genjutsu. And those of you who want to feel like you're different from everybody else would probably say something like Infinite Tsukiyomi. But I bet what probably very few of you just said is the genjutsu that Obito used on Yagura. But wildly enough, that might be the correct answer. But if you didn't say that, it's not like it's your fault, because even though this genjutsu is set up as being one of, if not the most powerful in the entire universe, you know, that doesn't include reflecting your Sharingan off a moon or using a Shinjutsu on the entire planet, we hardly know anything about this genjutsu. We don't know if it belongs to Obito, if it was stolen from another Uchiha clansman, or even its name. We know that Tsunade estimated that whoever used this genjutsu was most likely related to Shisui in some way or another, because fundamentally it seemed as though this genjutsu was identical to that of Koto Amatsukame, and we know that this genjutsu was able to effect a perfect Jinchuriki for almost a decade. But outside of that, nothing. How little we know about this genjutsu isn't even the worst part about this genjutsu. No, the worst part about this genjutsu is that we only ever see it used the one time. But why? Why would Obito only ever use a genjutsu that is actively compared to Koto Matsukame once? Well, I could sit here and tell you, well, because Obito never needed to use it again. That is just plain false. And therefore, fundamentally, I not only believe that this may be a massive plot hole in Naruto, but inarguably maybe the biggest plot hole in Naruto. And therefore today, it is a plot hole that I'd love to explore with you. So with no further ado, let's get directly into Naruto's biggest plot hole explained. But before we get to explaining anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you're looking for one additional NC Hammer 23 video every single week, guys, you can go ahead and find my Naruto reaction series using the fourth wall link in my description below. Gaara's trying to kill Rock Lee in a hospital bed, and for some reason, Mike Guy's not doing anything about it. But before we get into all that, today we need to talk about a recurring sponsor to the page, Raycon. With both the Super Bowl and the Winter Olympics happening this month, there's never been a better time to push our bodies to all that they're capable of. And when you're training consistently, the right gear makes all the difference. And I know recently I've been upgrading my workout gear with Raycon's essential open earbuds. See, they completely change how I work out because they don't block out all the sound around me, and yet they still are able to deliver high fidelity sound into my ears. So I can stay aware while I'm running or lifting, but still hear crisp audio delivered through these Raycon open earbuds. So I can use some LA Dispute to get me through my tough chest days, or Otaku's Anonymous to get me through my long runs. And right now is the perfect time to grab Raycon's essential open earbuds because they're 15% off. And I know what you're thinking, Nick, how are earbuds that aren't in my ear gonna stay in my head? But when I tell you, these open earbuds are incredibly light and the ear hook swivels, so no matter what you do, they stay in, and they never get uncomfortable. And with already 3 million plus customers already hopping onto the Raycon bandwagon, as everyone's starting to realize that Raycon's audio quality is just as good as all of their competitors at half the price, there's never been a better time to join Team Raycon. But if you're not happy being over here on Team Raycon, which I doubt will happen, Raycon has a 30-day happiness guarantee. If you don't like them, return them at no cost to you. But when you start enjoying the multi-connectivity of these earbuds that allows for you to connect to multiple devices, their lightweight nature, and their 36-hour battery time, let's be real, you're not gonna need that guarantee. And I'll tell you, as a guy who's destroyed a couple of those other brands with how much I sweat at the gym, these things hold up. So what are you waiting for? The essential open-ear earbuds are here to help you grab gold. Go to buyraycon.com/NCHammer23 open to get 15% off. Thanks to Raycon for sponsoring today's video. When it comes to bag depth in Naruto, Obito has undoubtedly one of the deepest bags we've ever seen. Between his Kamui, wood release, Uchiha ninjutsu prowess, and so much more, there's basically nothing that Obito can't do, as evidenced by him being probably the third strongest antagonist in the entire story. However, an incredibly slept on aspect of Obito's power roster is his genjutsu ability. See, even if we ignore the fact that Obito is one of the very few people in the entirety of Naruto's timeline to ever successfully place a perfect Jinchuriki under genjutsu, something that, mind you, should be fundamentally impossible on account of the fact that the Jinchuriki should have their chakra disrupted by their tailed beast the second their tailed beast identifies that the Jinchuriki Izanagi has been placed under genjutsu, snapping them out of it, he also has a laundry list of a ton of other really impressive genjutsu feats. In Itachi's Shinden Book of Bright Night, Itachi's first light novel that was later adapted into the anime, we see Obito with just his genjutsu alone knock out an entire procession of ninja that are protecting the fire daimyo in hopes to get a chance to assassinate said fire daimyo. And Itachi was the only person out of this entire guard detail that was able to resist the genjutsu of Obito. In his battle against Kakashi during the Fourth Great Shinobi World War, he was able to go toe-to-toe with Kakashi in a clash of genjutsu abilities, as he not only forced Kakashi to see him, Obito, as Rin, as Kakashi ran him through the Chidori, but also hit Kakashi with the iconic "look in my chest, there's no heart there" moment, all of which were illusions that he was casting on Kakashi, another Mangekyo Sharingan wielder. He was also able to, after stabbing Konan, use genjutsu to probe into her brain to immediately find the location of Nagato's body. And if all of that is not enough for you, we also see in the lead up to the Fourth Great Shinobi World War, Obito using genjutsu on 6-tailed beasts simultaneously, as he controlled all 6 of them within the confines of his 6 paths of pain, which were the bodies of 6 Shinchuriki that he had killed and brought back using Edo Tensei. And while his control over these 6-tailed beasts wasn't absolute, he was able to control them to the point where he forced them to battle against Naruto and Killer Bee, a moment that was obviously predated by maybe a more impressive feat, which was Obito controlling Kurama on the night of Naruto's birth. And while Kurama obviously didn't need much in the way of a push from Obito to try and destroy Konoha, the place that Kurama hated more than anywhere else on Earth, still, we see that Obito was able to control Kurama to be able to break out of Kushina and rage in the center of Konoha. And that's all not mentioning Izanagi, which, if you consider it a genjutsu, which you should, Obito is the greatest single user of in the history of Naruto. See, it was established when Obito used Izanagi in his battle against Konan to save himself from total obliteration that he was able to maintain his Izanagi form for 10 minutes. That is, say, for the sacrifice of one eye, Obito would essentially become immortal for 10 minutes, able to impart the imaginary on the real-life world by being able to turn illusions into real life. If you blew away Obito's body, he could make an illusion of his body elsewhere and make that illusion physical. That's how Izanagi works. But being able to do that for 10 minutes is absurd. That's 10 times longer than people like Danzo, who was able to maintain his Izanagi form multiple times longer than everybody else in history. See, Danzo, because of his access to Hashirama's cells, which he had transplanted into his Shin Uchiha arm, could access the invincibility provided by Izanagi for a whole minute, which is multiple times longer than the Uchiha of the past, who sacrificed one of their Sharingan to activate Izanagi to deny their fate of death, were ever able to accomplish. Now, this mostly has to do with the chakra abundance that comes along with successfully grafting Hashirama's cells onto your body, but also in the specific case of Izanagi, combining the chakra of Asura's descendants, or maybe even Asura's reincarnation in Hashirama, with the chakra of Indra's descendants, that is to say the Uchiha or a Sharingan. People hoping to use the Izanagi would be able to use the Izanagi for longer, because Izanagi, after all, is just a watered-down version of Hagoromo's creation of all things jutsu. So the closer you became to Hagoromo, the better you would be at using a watered-down version of his jutsu. And because half of Obito's body was white Zetsu / Hashirama cells, he was able to cast a genjutsu on the entire world that lasted 10 minutes, where he could make the imaginary real using yin-yang release, allowing him to do crazy things like building himself a brand new body directly behind Konan so he can hit her with a little stabby stab. So, with all of that said, if Obito is such a proficient genjutsu user that he is 10 times better than the only person you could possibly compare him to, why don't we see him use genjutsu more often? Some of you are saying, well, Nick, we see him use genjutsu all the time. You're right, we do. We see Obito use genjutsu probably more than the vast majority of the cast of Naruto. But he should be using it more often. Specifically, he should be using his most powerful genjutsu more often. See, well, I could make an entire video answering the question of why doesn't Obito use the Izanagi all the time, considering the fact that he could use it for 10 minutes at a time and had an entire wall filled with Sharingan eyes. The answer to that question is relatively simple. A, because he didn't need to, and B, because by the time that he did need to, all the Sharingan were gone, destroyed, by Sasuke. But unfortunately, when trying to crack the code of the question, but then why didn't Obito use his basically Koto Matsukame ever again, the answer, well, is not so simple. Now, the logical answer to these questions would be something like, oh, he didn't need to, or oh, he couldn't. But based off everything that we know, neither of those answers work. So first, let's explore the idea that he couldn't. Now, this isn't the worst possible conclusion that you could come to, on account of the fact that we know Koto Matsukame, when in the hands of its original owner, Shisui, would have something like a decade-long cooldown. And therefore, it's not crazy to assume that whatever genjutsu Obito used on Yagura would have a comparable cooldown. I mean, after all, it is basically the exact same jutsu as Koto Matsukame. It functions the same, Tsunade said they were related, so yeah, it's basically Koto Matsukame. But there's just one problem with that idea. See, because I can say with a fair amount of confidence that the genjutsu that Obito used on Yagura probably didn't come from his Kamui Eye. Well, yes, it's possible that Obito's base Sharingan genjutsu, that's what it's called, was strong enough to inflict not only a lasting but also subliminal genjutsu effect on Yagura for a decade. Mind you, once again, he is a perfect Jinchuriki, and therefore this genjutsu either had to be so powerful that either Isobu wasn't able to break Yagura out of it, or Isobu was also affected by it. But if Obito was able to pull this off with just his base Sharingan genjutsu ability, that would make Obito never using it again even more preposterous. Now, the more likely scenario is that Obito was using the Sharingan of a deceased member of the Uchiha clan, something he did, mind you, almost his whole life to replace the one that he had given Kakashi. And therefore, either this Sharingan, when placed into Obito's skull, awoke his innate genjutsu abilities, which obviously he had access to at a relatively high level considering the fact that prior to the Uchiha massacre, he was able to control Kurama by himself, and Naruto's born before the Uchiha massacre, or the Sharingan that Obito slapped into his empty eyeball hole had a Koto Matsukame-esque ability that Obito used for himself, something that we know is a possibility based on the fact that we literally see Danzo do it. Stolen Sharingans, regardless of how you got your little grimy mitts on them, hold on to their abilities. It's why Madara and Kakashi can use Kamui, and why Danzo and Itachi's Crow technically can use Koto Matsukame. So if the Koto Matsukame-esque ability did come from somebody else's Sharingan, then it would admittedly be placed on the side of Obito's body that wasn't made out of Hashirama's cells, because it was Obito's healthy side, his non-crushed side, that had its Sharingan taken. So maybe some of you are wondering to yourself right now, that eye that's placed on the healthy side of Obito's body isn't affected by Hashirama's healing factor, and therefore maybe this Koto Matsukame-esque ability holding eye isn't affected by the cooldown reducing effects of Hashirama's cells, and therefore the cooldown should still be a decade. There it is. Plot hole closed. The reason that Obito never used his ability again is because he couldn't. Except, unfortunately, that doesn't work. See, the cooldown for Danzo's Koto Matsukame was roughly once a day, but he only had Hashirama's cells in his arm, not his face, where his Koto Matsukame eye was located. And therefore, there's no reason that Obito's Hashirama cell-based regeneration and cooldown negation should not work on his replacement eye, like it did for Danzo. So all that is to say that after using genjutsu on Yagura about a decade ago, Obito could have absolutely used it again, and probably should have. Which brings us to our second possible answer that would explain away this plot hole, which is, well, maybe he didn't have another scenario where he needed to use this genjutsu. But in order to support or refute that claim, we need to build out a little bit of a timeline. See, if we assume that Obito did not gain access to this genjutsu until the Uchiha massacre, something that may or may not be true because some story events seem to point towards the idea that not only was Yagura in charge, but also already a bloodthirsty maniac before the Uchiha massacre. But if we do assume that Obito does not gain access to the Koto Matsukame-esque ability that he uses against Yagura until the Uchiha massacre, that means that Obito had access to this ability for almost a decade before the events of Shippuden. And over the course of those 10 or so years, there are a million scenarios where Obito could have used Koto Matsukame that would have made his life substantially easier, especially when you consider the fact that not only does Koto Matsukame not require eye contact, but also can be used on high-level genjutsu-resistant threats like MS users, because Fugaku was gonna be the victim of Shisui's usage, and we see it used on Itachi. So if we're being real with ourselves, every single time Obito wanted to recruit somebody to the Akatsuki who did not want to join, like Deidara or Nagato, he simply could have forced them to join or coerced them in such a way that would lead to an easier path to them joining by using his genjutsu. Now, Nick, who's to say that he wasn't doing this exactly? Listen, there is a theory to be made that maybe all of the events in Naruto happened because slowly but surely Obito is pulling the strings from the shadows using his Koto Matsukame-esque ability. And I'll make that video someday, but today is not the day we make that video. But if we look at characters like Deidara, who's literally forced to join the Akatsuki because he lost in a fight to Itachi using genjutsu, which is why he literally trained one of his eyes to be more resistant to ocular-based genjutsu because he never wanted to lose like that again, then man alive, would it be a whole lot easier for Obito to just warp over to the location of somebody he wants to join the Akatsuki, stare at them from, oh, I don't know, 100 meters away, and implant the idea in their mind that they really do like this Eye of the Moon plan that they heard about in a bar the other day. And it's literally that simple. Hey, Obito, you want to destroy the world and destroy the way of the ninja? Amp up the bloodthirst of every Kage, except the Hokage, who's obviously insulated against being controlled via genjutsu because of their connection to the Hyuga. Konoha is the only village where dojutsu exists. The Mizukage, Yagura, was able to be controlled for almost a decade because it took a decade for somebody from the Hidden Mist village to get their hands on a Byakugan. And no other village, try as they might, has pulled that off yet. Obito could have not only controlled every single ninja village, he could have destabilized them to the point where picking off the Jinchuriki was like plucking an apple off a tree. Hell, he could have just controlled the Jinchuriki. Obito was not only able to control 6 Jinchuriki simultaneously, but also all of their tailed beasts. He was able to control a perfect Jinchuriki in Yagura. Not all of the Jinchuriki were perfect. In fact, most of them were far from it. And considering the fact that the Akatsuki literally could not get their hands on either Naruto, who Obito sees with his eyes multiple times, mind you, long before Naruto was even a perfect Jinchuriki, and Killer B, Obito could have just as easily used Koto Matsukame on either of them to make them sympathetic to the Eye of the Moon plan. And listen, I know what some of you are saying, oh, Nick, the reason that Obito never used Koto Matsukame in either Naruto or Killer B is because the Akatsuki didn't need the entirety of Kyuki or Kurama to make the Ten Tails. And like, fair. That's bad writing, but fair. Because what do you mean you only needed a part of the 2 strongest tailed beasts to make the 10 tails? Why didn't you just take a part of all of the tailed beasts? And yes, I know you can make the argument that Naruto couldn't be affected by Koto Matsukame because he's constantly surrounded by people who either have access to the Sharingan or the Byakugan. But boy oh boy, would that plan have worked on Killer B, the person who was basically single-handedly responsible for fighting against all 6 of Obito's paths of pain, and the guy who in his full transformation form literally shoved the tailed beast ball back into the throat of the Ten Tails. Would have been nice to have him on your side, wouldn't it have been, Obito? But Nick, some of you who can read right now are saying, but Obito blinded one of his eyes in his battle against Konan, most likely the eye that he used to control Yagura with his genjutsu. However, immediately after Obito uses Izanagi in his spare eye and kills Konan, he gets the Rinnegan. That's when the 4th Great Shinobi World War starts. We also have no confirmation that the eye that he blinded was his genjutsu eye. He had an entire wall of Sharingan, and the Uchiha love swapping out eyeballs. And considering the fact that the Koto Matsukame was in both of Shisui's eyes, there's a fair decent chance that Obito had a backup. All that is to say, unlike basically every other Naruto plot hole we've ever covered on this channel, I don't have an answer for this one. So I'm actually curious to hear from you guys. Listen, I'm willing to be wrong here, but why do you think Obito never used this genjutsu again? Let me know in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to spend the rest of this Friday afternoon touching my car.
Well, you can't make this up. It's smoking.